Throughout the age of dinosaurs, terrestrial, marine, and flying reptiles of various species and sizes spread across the planet. Many regions of Earth back then were vastly different from the landscapes we know today. However, even then, there were places that were far from ideal for life. Today, we want to tell you about how dinosaurs and their relatives adapted to living in deserts, swamps, highlands, and polar regions. You'll learn about the remarkable evolutionary mechanisms and discoveries made by scientists studying these extraordinary creatures of their time. Subscribe to our channel. Also, don't forget to like the videos you enjoy and leave your comments below them. These actions help promote and grow our channel. Your engagement will also allow other science enthusiasts from around the world to discover our content. In the distant Mesozoic era, our planet looked entirely different from what it is today. At the beginning of the dinosaur age, all continents were joined into a single subcontinent called Pangaea. By the end of this era, they were positioned almost as they are now. However, many landscapes resembled those inhabited by modern animals, though each had its own unique characteristics. Next, we'll explore the most common ecosystems and focus in detail on the inhabitants of the least hospitable environments. Vast areas of Pangaea were covered by grassy plains, though calling them that is a bit of a stretch, as true grass didn't exist yet. Its role was filled by low-growing ferns. Herds of various ceratopsians, hadrosaurs, and ornithopods roamed these plains, actively hunted by theropods like tyrannosaurs. Many dinosaurs lived on the low-lying, frequently flooded plains of Europe during the Cretaceous period. These wetlands covered enormous territories. Constantly nourished by sediment flowing down from the mountains and hills, they were a paradise for herbivores. Herds of iguanodons, as well as polycanthuses and tiny hypsilophodons, wandered through them, feeding on various horsetails and ferns. One of the most unusual dinosaurs to inhabit swamps was Deinocheirus. This large ornithomimosaur lived in what is now Mongolia during the late Cretaceous. It reached lengths of 11 to 12 meters, 36 to 39 feet, stood over 4 meters, 13 feet tall, and weighed up to 5 to 7 tons. Its body structure suggests it wasn't a fast runner. However, what makes Deinocheirus stand out is not its speed, but the structure of its forelimbs. Not only was Deinocheirus the largest of the ornithomimosaurs, but it also had the longest forelimbs of any theropod, measuring over 2 meters, 6.5 feet, and ending in 3 very long claws. These were likely used not so much for defense, but for pulling down tree branches, from which the dinosaur would strip leaves with its beak. Deinocheirus wasn't strictly herbivorous, it also ate fish. In a swampy environment, such a diet was ideal. Thanks to the swampy soil in what is now the German city of Tübingen, scientists were able to discover and study a new dinosaur called Tübingosaurus. This dinosaur belongs to the Plateosaurids, a group similar to sauropods but not closely related, from the late Triassic period. Due to the poor preservation of previously found specimens, scientists struggled to describe this group in detail, but Tübingosaurus provided a scientific treasure. It appears to have drowned in a swamp, falling on its side. Half of its body, buried under a layer of mud, was spared from scavengers or predators. Lush coastal forests grew along the rivers and swamps of the dinosaur era. These provided shelter for a wide variety of animals. The most famous of these are the coastal forests of the Morrison Formation in the United States, where the first remains of Diplodocus and Allosaurus were discovered. Coastal forests were typically flooded only during river or swamp overflows. However, Some forested areas were permanently swampy. In these waterlogged groves, the first flowering plants appeared earlier than in other ecosystems. Huge herds of duck-billed dinosaurs grazed in these flooded thickets, attracting carnivorous dinosaurs of all sizes, from troodons to tyrannosaurs. Life thrived in the waterways themselves. Rivers and lakes were the domain of various aquatic reptiles, amphibians, and crocodilomorphs. But many dinosaurs also actively hunted underwater prey. The most striking example of this adaptation is Spinosaurus. Scientists now have little doubt that this giant theropod led a semi-aquatic or possibly fully aquatic lifestyle. Close relatives like Baryonyx, which lived in Europe, and Suchomimus from North Africa weren't far behind. All of them had crocodile-like snouts with long jaws and thin, sharp teeth, perfect for catching and holding fish or other aquatic prey. Dinosaurs also lived along the shores of seas or oceans, though these shores were not where they are today. For example, one migration route of herbivorous dinosaur herds in the United States ran along the coast of an inland sea that, during the Cretaceous, covered parts of what are now Colorado and New Mexico. Today, the nearest ocean coast is in California. Migrating dinosaurs might have preferred those areas far more. Surviving in a desert is tough for any living organism. Yet, both now and in the age of dinosaurs, some creatures thrived in such extreme conditions. While the Sahara was covered in lush jungles back then, the Gobi Desert in Central Asia was already a vast sea of sand. The desert's arid climate, with near-zero humidity, promotes the excellent preservation of organic remains, and layers of sand protect bones from being scattered by other animals. It was in the Gobi Desert that dinosaurs like Protoceratops, Oviraptor, and Velociraptor were found. One remarkable fossil shows a Velociraptor and a Protoceratops locked in combat. It's believed a sandstorm buried the two dinosaurs during their struggle. There's also a chance that both were already dead, having inflicted fatal wounds on each other by the time they were buried under the sand. Let's explore how these dinosaurs survived the harsh conditions of the Mesozoic desert. Protoceratops was relatively primitive compared to its North American relatives, like Triceratops. Initially, it was thought to be an ancestor of other ceratopsians, hence its name. It lacked prominent horns, sporting only a robust, leathery frill. Scientists believe one function of this frill was to dissipate excess heat, a critical adaptation for desert survival. Oviraptors and Velociraptors were small, carnivorous theropods, weighing no more than 20 kilograms, 44 pounds, and covered in feathers, suggesting they were likely warm-blooded. Feathers provided modern birds with effective thermoregulation, and they likely served the same purpose for these dinosaurs. It's probable that these dinosaurs weren't exclusively desert dwellers. Most likely, they inhabited semi-deserts and sparse woodlands. However, a small theropod called Shuvuia was likely a true desert resident. Its remains were also found in the Gobi Desert. Scientists were astonished by its striking resemblance to birds. Shuvuia means bird in Mongolian. This tiny alvarezar weighed only 1 to 2 kilograms, 2 to 4 pounds, stood up to 25 centimeters, 10 inches tall, and had a body length of up to 70 centimeters, 28 inches. Shuvuia is thought to have had excellent hearing and vision and led a primarily nocturnal lifestyle. Analysis of the eyes of nearby velociraptors suggests they were crepuscular, active at dawn and dusk, so Shuvuia likely occupied a niche similar to modern owls. Some of the most comfortable ecosystems for dinosaurs were likely the shores of shallow seas and lagoons formed by reef chains. Such places are teeming with diverse life even today. Lagoons inhabited by various petrosaurs as well as Compsognathus and Archaeopteryx existed, for example, in what is now Europe. The remains of these animals are well preserved in the muddy layers at the bottom, or along the shores of these water bodies. A prime example is the lagoon discovered in Zonhofen, Germany. Little is known about dinosaurs that lived in mountainous regions. An example of a highland dinosaur is Andysaurus, a sauropod whose remains were found in the Andes of South America. However, it seemed these dinosaurs settled along riverbanks and swamps. Andysaurus was a relatively small, herd-living sauropod, reaching 15 to 20 meters, 49 to 66 feet in length, and weighing no more than 7 tons. Populations of animals living in isolated island environments often involve distinct traits. These changes frequently manifest as reduced body size and overall simplification of organisms. Examples include the dwarf mammoths of Wrangel Island and the hobbits of Flores Island, which we've mentioned in previous videos. During the dinosaur era, islands also hosted unique species. About 100 million years ago, what is now Romania was home to Hattig Island. Dwarf titanosaurs called Magyarosaurus and primitive ornithopods called Telmatosaurus lived here. The remains of a giant petrosaur, Hatzegopteryx, were also found, though islands likely served as temporary stopovers during its seasonal migrations. By the late Cretaceous, the climate in polar regions, while not as harsh as today, was still challenging. Dinosaurs living in the North and South Poles had to adapt to these tough conditions. Alaska is a well-studied and revealing location in this regard. Numerous dinosaur species have been found there. Although the peninsula was already within the Arctic Circle at the time, the climate was much milder than it is today. As a result, Alaska was more densely populated than it is now. These animals had to survive polar nights and sub-zero temperatures. Among the most notable dinosaurs that lived in Alaska are Pachyrhinosaurus, Edmontosaurus, Nanuqsaurus, Troodon, Saurornitholestes. In addition to dinosaurs, the polar forests of the late Cretaceous, composed of primitive coniferous trees, were home to early mammals. A typical creature of this region was Unuakomis, a small animal distantly related to modern opossums. How did these ancient polar inhabitants survive polar nights and cold winters? In the modern animal world, several mechanisms allowed species to cope with these challenges. Some enter hibernation, slowing their metabolism and conserving stored fat. This is not uncommon among reptiles, which dinosaurs essentially were. However, scientists have yet to find evidence of a dinosaur hibernating in a cozy den. Many modern animals in polar regions migrate to warmer, food-rich areas during the cold season, like caribou. However, some populations remain in extreme conditions year-round. It's been proven that Edmontosaurus in Alaska were sedentary herbivores. Scientists compared the bone structure of Alaskan Edmontosaurus with those from other regions, as these dinosaurs were widespread as far south as modern-day Colorado. Animal bones have a similar structure to tree rings, with thinnest layers of calcium forming during unfavorable seasons. Alaskan Edmontosaurus bones show distinct banding. Additionally, it was found that by the onset of the polar night, Edmontosaurus hatchlings were still too small to endure long migrations south. In contrast, migrating caribou calves are much closer to adulthood when migrations begin. The dominant predator in Cretaceous Alaska was Nanuqsaurus, sometimes called a dwarf tyrannosaur. Nanuq means polar bear in local dialect. Reconstructions often depict this theropod as covered in short, white down. However, few Nanuqsaurus remains have ever been found. It was a classic bipedal carnivorous dinosaur, up to 7 meters, 23 feet long, and weighing about 2 tons. Initially, researchers thought its small size was an adaptation to the harsh climate, but later reconstructions showed that adult Nanuqsaurus was comparable in size to other moderately sized tyrannosaurids. The southern polar regions were also densely populated during the Dinosaur Era. At that time, Antarctica's climate was closer to temperate, and the continent was covered in vast forests. Finding dinosaur remains under meters of ice is nearly impossible today, but nature occasionally surprises scientists with remarkable discoveries. During the summer thaw of 1990 to 1991, the skull and several bones of an Arctic theropod, later named Cryolophosaurus, meaning frozen crested lizard, were found. This predator, up to 8 to 9 meters, 26 to 30 feet long, and weighing about 900 kilograms, 2,000 pounds, had an ornate crest on its skull, likely used to attract mates. In the future, more dinosaurs that lived in Antarctica may be discovered. For now, with the continent buried under ice, we can learn about polar region inhabitants by studying fossils found in Australia. During the Dinosaur Era, Australia was much closer to the South Pole than it is today, experiencing polar nights and cold temperatures. Examples of adaptations to these harsh conditions include Leolinosaura, with its very large eyes, and Minmi, a small, possibly cold-blooded ankylosaur. Nature on our planet is designed so that living organisms strive to colonize every corner, from the depths of the Mariana Trench to the summit of Everest. Dinosaurs were no exception. As science advances and new data emerges, we will undoubtedly learn about more extraordinary Mesozoic species that lived in seemingly impossible conditions. This ability to adapt to environmental changes allowed all modern species, including humans, to emerge. Today, humans live in mountains, deserts, and even beyond the Arctic Circle. In the future, we may need to adapt to long journeys through the depths of space and the unfamiliar conditions of other planets. In closing, we traditionally thank the viewers who watched this episode to the end. From other videos on the Age of Dinosaurs channel, you can learn more about the lives of creatures from various eras, the history of their discovery and study, as well as modern animals, humans' relationship with nature, and various ecological issues.